Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Tuesday, the 4th of September. We're coming up on 10 minutes after 6 p.m. Sorry for the slightly delayed beginning here. Had to wait till the room was cleared out, and here I am. Okay, just a couple of things right off the bat. We're going to talk about Tropical Storm Gordon, and we are also going to talk about Hurricane Florence. I just took a peek, by the way, at the new GFS that's coming out, and it's only out to about 90 hours, but we'll just leave that for now. In the meantime, we're going to go right to Gordon. By the way, just want to mention, I'm going to just say really quickly, some of you have actually joined up on my new Patreon site. I have a link to it in the descriptor of this video for those of you who would like to join Patreon. It's a great way to support this channel. There's a couple of tiers that you can choose from, and it'll give you all the website posts that I put up with no ads and notifications, which is really important. So if you feel up to it, do check it out. It's on the descriptor to this video. Okay, let's get right to it and let's get going with Gordon. I'm going to start off with some of the surface observations that we're seeing at the moment. And hopefully it'll scale on a radar. Right now we're seeing, and it's actually doing that, it's just updating the radar as we're speaking. We see that there's a peak wind gust offshore. The storm is 90 miles south of Mobile and about 90 or so miles southeast of Biloxi, which is where the center is heading toward the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The band, as the radar tries to update, it's just kind of slow on the uptake here, but there's a band of very heavy squalls that just went through one of the buoys offshore where we could see a gust of 58 miles an hour. There have been gusts to gale force right along the immediate coast. Most of the winds have been on the order of 20 to 30 miles an hour with gusts into the 30s and 40s. It's a bit on the breezy side back through southeastern Louisiana, but we're not seeing any really exceptional numbers here with the center offshore. And I think because of the fact that we're talking about a system that is really on the small side, as far as the core is concerned, we're going to probably have limited wind impacts. At least that's my belief. Also, storm's running out of time. Part of the circulation is now over land, and when we go to the satellite loop, you're going to see the fact that there is actually some shearing going on, which is probably preventing this. If it wasn't for the wind shear, more than likely this would probably have intensified to maybe a strong Category 2 or even a Category 3. But as we've been mentioning the last few days, while conditions were favorable for strengthening, they were far from being ideal. The radar views, we're going to start with the wide view of the radar of the lower Mississippi Valley. Clearly you can see the center of Gordon approaching the coast. Also, the rains today have been on the Florida Panhandle. Only in the last several hours are we seeing some heavy rains moving into the Alabama coast, and mainly east of Mobile. To the west of there, as you go toward Gulfport, Biloxi, and then on up toward New Orleans, there have been some scattered bands of showers coming in from the east, but there hasn't been anything exceptionally heavy. So I again am thinking if areas that are going to be to the south and west of the track of the center will probably wind up with rain that shouldn't be too problematic. And even areas that are north and east of the center, yes, the rain will probably cause some flash flooding. But the fact that this system is moving at a fairly steady clip will mean that eventually the rains will get out of the way. So it's not like we're talking about what happened, for example, back with Hurricane Harvey last year, where it sat over southeast Texas for 4 days. That is not in the cards here, and it never really was. We'll go to a couple of local radar views. First off, we can see this from the perspective of the New Orleans radar. big cell moving along the north shore, right along I-10 to the west of Slidell, and not too far from Baton Rouge. And actually, the area near Baton Rouge, they're seeing another band that's moving out. The one that's to the east of Baton Rouge looks like it's heading toward them. Then there's a break, and then you've got some other cells in southern Mississippi, some scattered cells that are falling in parts of southeast Louisiana down to the mouth of the Mississippi River. These radars, by the way, as of 6 o'clock Eastern Time, or a little after 6 o'clock Eastern Time. So, of course, if you're watching this on a replay, you want to check out your local radar later this evening by going to weather.gov and going to your local National Weather Service office. And, of course, please do not use any of the maps here as the information that you would use to make decisions. We are showing these for illustration purposes only. You need to go to official websites like the National Hurricane Center website, nhc.noaa.gov, or to the National Weather Service in your local office, which you can get to at weather.gov. Here's the tight view of the Mobile radar. You can see the center is offshore, the heavy rain bands that are back over on the Florida Panhandle. I'm going to pull up the storm totals just to see what's fallen so far. And from the standpoint of the storm totals, we don't quite yet have, at least from the side of the Mobile radar. Let me jump one radar further east because sometimes it's a little deceptive. Yeah, the rain totals so far through, I want to make sure, am I doing the storm total? Trying to see what the time point is here. So actually, all right, for some reason, they're running on their storm totals. This is actually just in the last hour. Usually when you have, you look at these radars, you're seeing there's the 1 hour total option and a storm total option, but for some reason, I'm getting the option for 1 hour. Okay, so that's down in Florida. I just wanted to see where that would take us. But some of the bands of rain in the circulation that surrounds Gordon actually impacting parts of South Florida offshore. Let me just make sure I'm showing you the right thing. I mean, that's the storm totals from yesterday. Okay, never mind. Forget I said that. All right. Now, on to, here's the Florida radar just to show you that there are some bands right along the coast from Sarasota on up toward Tampa and further to the north. So that's the western edge, the eastern edge of the outermost bands, just kind of straddling just along and just off the Florida west coast. Now, if we take a look at the satellite loop, okay, you can see the shear that's actually going on here. The enhancement is actually rather impressive, but the center is kind of on the edge of all this. The radar presentation verifies that, and notice there really isn't a whole lot when you go to the west at the moment near the Mississippi Gulf Coast and into southeastern Louisiana. It's all been to the east. So this is there is some shear that is occurring. You can see the area is just kind of getting stretched out to the north and east somewhat. So it's not enough shear to tear the system apart, but it is probably just enough to keep this from getting much stronger than what it already is. It still has some hours before landfall. It still could make minimal hurricane, but it would be, I think, just that, and nothing beyond it, because after that, it is going to be inland. And by the way, when we looked at the last reconnaissance aircraft check that occurred this afternoon, the 4 passes that went through, the pressure went 1,005, 1,005, 1,003, 1,004, and 1,006. Now, there were winds between 50 and 55 knots, and in fact, there were some winds that were showing up even higher than that, which is, I think, why the Hurricane Center went with the max wind at 70 miles an hour. I'm just going to check to see if there's a new mission in there. It might be a little bit too early for it. And also, as always, thank you to tropicaltidbits.com for letting us show this on our live stream and when we show the graphics on our website. Doesn't look like this is the last mission from a few hours ago, so we don't have anything new at the moment. Okay, so here's the National Hurricane Center's map to indicate what's going on with respect to the warnings and the area of gales, which is now coming on shore. The red, the hurricane warning from the Florida-Alabama border to about the Mississippi-Louisiana border. Tropical storm warnings for the shores running along the eastern flank of southeastern Louisiana. They have been canceled for the areas out to the west, which makes sense. And we also still have a tropical storm warning for Lake Pontchartrain. But again, with the center moving along this track, I would suspect that it's going to be, near or east of the center, gets into the big rains, much less so as you head to the west. So north and east of that track, probably the band you see would be a good representation of who's going to wind up with 3, 4, 5, or even 6 inches of rain. And then you go south and west of there, the amounts are going to tail off rather quickly. And of course, we can extend the heavy rains across Alabama and into Florida, into the western part of the Panhandle of Florida, to just east of Pensacola, because that's where we've been seeing it on the radars so far. So just really fast, as far as the 6 o'clock advisory is concerned, we are looking at. I'll bring up the map. I'm sorry, that's Florence. My fault. And well, before we even go there, here's the rain forecast from WPC, and it pretty much verifies, it just reinforces what I said in terms of the heavy rains. 6 inches plus in a bubble in southern Alabama, southeastern Mississippi, the extreme western part of the Florida Panhandle, with a general area of 4 to 6 that runs north and west of there. So this is all basically north and east of the storm track. And as far as the forecast storm track is concerned with Gordon, here it is on their map, and the latest advisory, which is from 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central, 29.4 north, 87.8 west, 70-mile-an-hour top winds, moving on a steady northwest course at about 15 miles per hour. Now, looking at the view, we're going to look at the HRRR model, and one of the things I notice, at least with respect to the short range models, is they really don't intensify this very much between now and landfall. And landfall on the HRRR occurs about midnight, and then it goes. You can see the low center moves its way northwestward into southwest Mississippi. If we want to use the NAM, just as a comparison, the NAM takes the low center in a little bit further to the west, probably right into that corner there in coastal Mississippi. Doesn't really change the pressure very much, and we'd say landfall would be more on the order of about 2 or 3 a.m. So there's about a couple of hours difference between the two models, mainly because of the fact that I think because the NAM has got a slightly more west track, the landfall takes an hour or two longer. That further west track probably just changes the trajectory about by 20 or 25 miles, which is enough to add the extra time. So, it's just somewhere right along the Mississippi Gulf Coast is where we're going to see landfall sometime a little after midnight. I think we'll just give it a range between, say, midnight and 3 a.m. I think that really works very well. And notice again, it does move along. You're still going to be dealing with some bands of rain into Wednesday and Wednesday night. That circulation then turns westward and continues to weaken and moves into Texas. So you'll probably start to get the remnant low will probably produce some diurnal effects with regards to seeing the rains flaring up during the day and then decreasing at night. So at least it's not going to be some crazy rain producer for the most part once it moves inland and dies out. So we've gotten Gordon taken care of. There really isn't too much in terms of a forecast challenge with this because of the fact that it's just about getting ready to move ashore. So now let's move on to Tropical Storm Florence. And here it is. I'm sorry, Hurricane Florence. And here it is on the satellite loop this evening. I just kind of freshened it up a little bit. It actually has a fairly well-developed core. The distance from here to here is roughly 150, 175 miles. So this is a little bit of a bigger system. This is a bigger system and has a larger circulation than Gordon and some of the other storms that we've seen so far this year. Top winds are 85 miles an hour. You see the grayish area here. The cloud tops got rather cold, which is usually you start to see that happening with a storm that is strengthening, and it may strengthen a little bit more. It seems to be doing this in spite of the fact that there is some moderate wind shear going on, but it's holding its own, and it's moving on a course, west-northwest, say 280, 285 degrees. And by the way, it's still pretty far out there. It hasn't even gotten to 45 degrees west yet. So this thing has not really made a whole lot of distance over the last several days. It's just kind of plodding along at a relatively slow pace. I do want to show you, however, that we, on the wider satellite view, one of the issues going forward, and we've been speaking about this quite a bit the last few days. You can see on the left is Gordon. Then you have, and going east, northeast of the Leeward Islands, there is an upper low and trough that is producing showers and storms, and you'll notice those clouds are kind of being blown off to the northeast. So there is some wind shear there, some increasing wind shear. To the right of that, we have the circulation and Hurricane Florence. Looks pretty well defined here on the visible side of the loop. And again, inching its way toward the west. Behind that is the next tropical wave, which, by the way, the Hurricane Center now rates as an 80% chance of developing into a tropical depression over the next 5 days. And you can see the turning that is going on there. That wave, by the way, is further south than Florence is. This is well south, passing well south of the Cabo Verde Islands, and it's kind of straddling along 10 degrees north. So this is going to have, I think, more westerly component to it going forward, as opposed to Florence, which is now sitting up at about 20 degrees north and roughly about 44 degrees west. But over the next couple of days, we're going to start to see Florence getting into this zone with the shear, because that has been there for the last 3 or 4 days, and it doesn't look like it's getting out of the way. This is going to be very critical because, as we've discussed, the weaker the system is, the more likely it is going to be to respond to the lower level steering winds, which will be more east to west, as opposed to the higher level steering, which would want to kind of drag it up further to the north. And that could have, serious impact regarding recurvature and whether it happens or not. So very important, I think, the next 2 or 3 days. We can tell you that regardless, it is no threat. And I'm going to use the Hurricane Center's quote in that they said there's no threat to any land at least through the weekend. So I'm kind of thinking that they're looking at everything that's going on, and given the fact that there's spread in the model guidance, and there's actually a fairly wide spread in the model guidance, we've got a few models that just kind of move it along on a west or west-northwest course right out through the next 5 days and get it to almost to 60 degrees west, right around 25 degrees north. It looks like the cluster wants to go to about 30 and shy of 60, with a gradual turn more toward the north, and then you have a few outliers that are turning it north faster and then eventually to the northeast. Anytime you see these spaghetti plots, do not use this map to make decisions. Seek official information, and that is very, very important. For those of you who are watching for the first time, by the way, welcome to my YouTube channel. Appreciate you being here, and get used to seeing some of these maps. We do tend to get a little technical here when we are looking at these, when we're looking at our weather. across the U.S. and in this instance, sometimes out in the Atlantic, and sometimes when we look at weather across Western Europe, because we do have some folks that watch from that part of the world. All right, back to Florence. We're going to go to the GFS. I'm going to be surprised as you, since I've only seen it out to 90 hours. First off, here's Gordon on the GFS. Goes inland. The pressure is roughly at around 1,000. I think that's 1,006 or 1,000. It's hard for me to read the number. It's 1,002 when it gets inland. That might be 1,000 millibars. So it has a little time to pick up a little more strength before it goes in. Same idea. Kind of turns it to the west, weakens it. You can see the diurnal effects of downpours increasing, and then they decrease at night. And then it's going to get involved with the next frontal system. So we've taken care of that. Let's move on. Let's now move on back to Florence, as we said. Sorry, I know sometimes I do jump around. It's often because I see something and I think, I need to explain this. Okay, so back to Florence, which we now have out to 180 hours, which takes us into a week from Wednesday morning. And here we go. So Florence is the low that is at this map is at around 20 and a half at about 44, moving west-northwestward. And then notice, by the way, from 60 hours out to 90 hours, it actually moves straight westward during that 30-hour period for some reason. Now it's on the edge of the ridge, the high that is over the Azores. And also, if you look to the north and west, there is a cold front that is going to be moving through the northeast and northern mid-Atlantic states late Thursday night. So that front by Saturday morning is running along and south of 40 degrees north back into Virginia, where it stalls out, and then westward into the middle Mississippi Valley, where we have low pressure and the remnants of Gordon there, and a pretty sizable high north of Lake Superior at this point. So let's go from here, from 90 hours. Looks like we're starting to take a little bit more of a northerly course. It doesn't seem to be moving very much in that 30-hour time frame. It's kind of inching along. Surface high comes out. Now at this point, the GFS, as it has been doing, it has this down to 952 millibars, which is a Category 3 hurricane. The thing is, if that shear zone is there, it's hard to think that it would be that strong, but because the European has a much weaker system at this stage of the game, starts to strengthen it as it moves further north, because the European today did turn it out. Okay, so now we are at Monday, and now we're back again to this idea out to 186, turning back to the west. So why don't we look at the upper air and see what happens. This is really so frustrating for a forecaster to have to deal with this. But this is the world. This is what it is. This is the weather world as it is. You don't get certitude this far out into the long range. But the players remain. Trough moving through southeastern Canada. Ridge in the Atlantic. It has, it's not the strongest ridge in the world. That trough drops down. I think the trough on this run is a little weaker than the prior GFS run, which misses the system. And then you get a ridge that builds off the New England coast. One of the differences in this run that I can already see is the fact that there is a short wave behind that lead short wave that the models were moving along and picking it up and picking Florence up and kicking it out. Now it looks like, at least out to 162 hours, that short wave running from James Bay to western New York is not nearly as deep. And that is allowing this upper high to build off the Carolinas. So suddenly we have a deflection back to the west, and we're now back to this sort of cradled look with the upper high cradling around it and a ridge building up to the north. This looks like the European did yesterday. where it took it and eventually turned it toward the west and kind of pointed it toward the southeast coast or toward Florida. So now we're seemingly now the GFS is suddenly doing this. I can show you. Hang on, I'm going to switch maps because I want to go to the European. This is the GFS now out to 186 hours. I wouldn't pay too much attention to the pressure value because we don't know if that's real, and at this point we need to really work out the track before we start getting involved with regards to the strength. So here's the European today, and look at the difference for the same time frame. It has it well northeast of Bermuda because it gets caught by the trough on this run. The European model, which yesterday was saying that no, the ridge would build and cradle it, now instead says differently with regards to it. There's the short wave on the European, which is even stronger than the GFS, coming through at the end of the week, and this is Saturday morning. There goes Florence, pulled to the north, and then the second short wave that comes out of the Great Lakes just picks it up and then carries it out to the east. In the meantime, we have this huge upper high on the European that builds over the Great Lakes, meaning we'll be back to heat and humidity again later next week. But I don't know. I don't know. Is this correct? Is the extent of that trough correct on the European versus the new GFS? It's a kind of a flatter look. They both have the troughs there, but it's really the second shortwave that picks it up, and the new GFS says no, it doesn't, and now it's kind of got it pointed toward the Carolinas here as we move through the middle part of next week. The puzzle pieces here remain the same, folks. There really isn't anything that's any different than yesterday, other than the fact that we are seeing models just basically flipping back and forth. The Canadian, by the way, is more like the GFS today than the European. And I think you're still going to be seeing flips back and forth. This is going to be a we're just going to continue to be an extremely frustrating forecast exercise over the next week to 10 days. And I can't unequivocally say one way or the other which way this is ultimately going to go. You obviously have seen now what we're dealing with in the upper air and how inherently complex all of this stuff really is. And yeah, it is just absolutely enough to drive you bananas. All right, I'm joining you guys on the chat board right now. So a big collective hello. There's a lot of you on here. I'm just noticing that Okie AG, who I haven't seen in a while, is on. Johnny Quest, our resident rain champion here. And of course, Anthony Orr, our resident statistician. And I'm going to try and get Gary Vestos. I haven't seen you in a while either. Okay, so weather tracker, the new, as we just pointed out, the new GFS has now gone in the other direction. Let's see. I'm just trying to get to weather Enlo. Don't get too concerned with what you're seeing right now because we still don't know where this is all going to wind up. Maryland has only hit, as Jimmy Hayden points out, by 2 hurricanes ever, or at least on record since 1851. That part of the mid-Atlantic states is kind of in an odd place because you go down into coastal North Carolina, which sticks out, they get hit. You go up north of Delaware, New Jersey, Long Island, and New England, but particularly southern New England, Long Island, they get hit. It's that area in between that winds up seeing most of the storms passing to the east. Very, very few have found their way up into Chesapeake Bay, which is a good thing because if you were ever to get a Sandy-like storm to move up into Chesapeake Bay, the flooding would be insane. Okay, let's see. Just trying to see. Yeah, Peter Bicker. I really wouldn't put too much emphasis on the strength. We don't know how we don't know how the model is handling that. First of all, we don't know if the GFS is handling that area of shear that the storm is going to run into, which I would suspect would weaken it. I think the European might have the better idea there, but perhaps the fact that it's going where the GFS takes it, that water there is very warm. Ocean water temperatures there are near or actually a little bit above average, so that part of the equation at least would be supportive. Okie AG, please ask Gordon to swing by here, put the coffee on for a visit. You've only had 1.75 inches of rain since May, Okie AG. Talk to Johnny Quest, who's had probably about 40 to 45 inches or more since the same time frame. Corey Bodziak, Jersey Shore over the weekend, very warm water. I know water temperatures in the mid-70s to around 80. You know, we've got a little time, so I want to just, let me go back to the maps. Let's just do a little bit of weather that's going on tonight, because we do have some stuff going on that I want to bring up. Let's see. First off, with respect to severe weather, we do have, of course, a marginal risk of severe weather where Gordon is making landfall. We actually have a tornado watch up. This is as of 6:40 Eastern time. You're watching this later. Remember, local radars to get the latest info at weather.gov, and go to your local National Weather Service site, because what you're seeing if you're watching this later is dated. But we do have a tornado watch that was posted there for parts of Iowa, southeastern Minnesota, and parts of Wisconsin, area of marginal to slight risk there, and a small area of marginal risk in northwestern Kansas and in parts of central Oklahoma. So we'll take care of that. Now, as far as the rainfall is concerned, here's the 7-day rainfall forecast. I always like to use WPC rainfall. These maps, they do a pretty good job in their forecasting. You could see the stripe of heavy rains with respect to Gordon running up into the Mississippi Valley and then pushing eastward. Some of this rain is from thunderstorms that'll probably come through parts of the northeast and northern mid-Atlantic on Thursday with the next cold front, and then again maybe for later Sunday night into Monday. Johnny Quest, it looks like the heaviest rains might be setting up just to your north. You are in that bluish band, 7-day rainfalls of about 1.5 inches. But, you know, you who get 6 inches at a clip from any given thunderstorm, I'm sure that is something that you would be able to say it's just a drizzle by comparison. Okay, let me come back. I want to go back to the GFS and just show you what's happening in the east. Bring that up. Okay, so we'll back to the GFS we go. I've got a little less than 9 minutes left before I have to say goodbye, so I want to cover this. Here we are. Okay, so again, maps like this this is guidance. This is not Bible. Here's your front for Thursday, which will produce some showers and storms. There's a nice high over Lake Superior there. That's going to be building into the east. The front slows down and stalls. The high starts to build in. I think there might be enough dry air to make for a halfway decent second half of Saturday and early Sunday for me, from, say, northern New Jersey, northeastern Pennsylvania, north and east. The boundary of clouds will be just to the south, and the boundary of rain with the stalled front, Virginia, North Carolina, westward. Looks like the heaviest rains want to go west of the Appalachians, because that's where the next surface low is going to be coming out of. That high really wedges down, so there'll be a decent onshore flow keeping things cool around here, starting on Friday, but particularly Saturday, Sunday into Monday. And then here's the rain that comes up with the warm front that moves through. A weak cold front will pass after that. Not much push behind it, but of course now we're setting up for how the GFS wants to handle Gordon, which again, this is just this run, keeping it just offshore and basically beginning a turn as we go into time. But again, this is all pure speculation and is not a forecast. And I guarantee you, as we just saw it flip, if you want a perfect example of why you got to be so careful with this, with stuff like this, when you see these on the map, I'm just going back 4 runs. So this is for next Wednesday, okay? This is Wednesday, September 12th. This was 4 runs ago, 3 runs ago. Then we have the day run, and it's not even there on the day run, and then suddenly it's back on the most recent run. This is why we say, who knows? And with respect to the overall pattern in the longer term, the big question continues to be the ridge. You do have the models trying to tilt the trough down off the west coast in the longer term. And that's going to want to push the ridge up in the east. I will say, and it's important, with respect to storms coming up the east coast, it has been my experience that you need a trough of some kind in the Ohio Valley and extending down into the Tennessee Valley. If you think back to July into August when we had those, I think it was 3 or was it 4? I lost track now. But we had those 3 major troughs, I think it might have been 4, that formed in the eastern part of the United States, creating southerly flows along the east coast. This is the kind of upper flow that is very problematic if you have a tropical system, because it's just going to want to shoot right up. You don't have a trough in this case. You have ridges on either side with weakness in the middle, and it's going to be a natural tendency, if there's a weakness, for something to want to turn northward and northeastward and pass offshore. Now the other option is if the ridge is very strong, it could deflect this further left, and that's where you wind up with bigger risks, say, for the Carolinas and for Florida. Again, we're just guessing here at this point. There really isn't a whole lot more that we can do with regards to Florence. So you know what? Tomorrow at the same time, we are going to be looking at this yet again. And I guarantee you we are going to see different solutions again because of the fact that it's really about the ridges and about the troughs, but particularly the ridge in the east and out in the Atlantic, and what kind of strength are we dealing with? Is it going to keep Florence from exploiting that weakness that's going to show up in the central Atlantic and turning on out to the northeast? Okay, I think we're going to just start wrapping it up here. Thanks very much for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. We got a nice crowd here, and I love it when everybody's on and you're talking in the chat. Thanks again. Appreciate it. Okay, you can support this channel by joining Patreon, and there's a link on the descriptor to this video, and you could become a regular sponsor of this if you so choose. You can go to that link and you can see what's on there. All my website posts go on there. You get to see it you'll get to see them with no ads. I'm writing stuff all day long about the weather, and if you are a weather junkie, and you haven't been to my website yet, you can appreciate it. The regular website right now is at meteorologistjoecioffi.com, but for the time being, what I post on there, posts on Patreon for free. Eventually, some of that won't be, but at least for now, we're doing that. And with respect to those of you who shop on Amazon, you can do that with the Amazon link that's also on the descriptor. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon and its affiliated sites. 9:15 tonight on Facebook, meteorologist Joe Cioffi or Joe Rayo Weather. You can join us for the Joe and Joe Weather Show, and we'll go over all this and let you know if there's anything new on Gordon. And as far as the live stream is concerned for tomorrow, I'll probably, unless there's something substantial going on with respect to Gordon in southeast Louisiana, I may just wait till my regular live stream time, which will be roughly at 6 o'clock Eastern, and then we can just take a straight look at the local weather and what's going on and Florence and the new adventures that the weather models will take us on come Wednesday. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you again for being here, and thank you for supporting my channel. If you're new, by the way, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That is absolutely free, and you get notifications when I do live streams, which is at least once a day. Take care. We'll see you later, hopefully on Facebook for the Joe and Joe Weather Show.